Honor, if you could change it to podium HDMI. Thank you. Your Honor, I think it went to the Elmo instead of the HDMI. Thank you.
Thank you. May be seated. Mr. Perez, you're still under oath.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, we had talked earlier about your use of a GoPro helmet camera, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And it's correct to say that you captured a video of the incident of, or I should say, of the incident that included the officer-involved shooting of James Boyd.
Yes.
And you've had a chance to review what has been marked as Exhibit B5, have you
Yes.
not? And is that a fair and accurate representation of the video that you took of your involvement and the others' involvement in the officer-involved shooting of James Boyd?
Yes.
At this time, Your Honor, we would like to move Officer Perez's Exhibit B5 into evidence.
Judge, is this the exhibit that has notations?
No.
Great. No?
Well, we will talk about Exhibit B5 and talk about the notations, which will be admitted as yet another exhibit.
Okay, I have no objection to this one if there's no notations on it. Are there any notations?
There are the notations that were made previously that have previously been shown. And we're having the witness testify about those notations. That's why they're there.
Judge, I object to this being played then on direct, and I would ask that the videotape without notations be played on direct, because I think it's leading to the notations on it.
Can I have you approach? I have some questions about how to do it.
Sure, Judge.
We'll be in recess for a few minutes. But as you can sit down, you know.
Yes, ma'am.
You have to read the decorum order, it applies to everyone. Officers, take that one back. I'll print one for Ms. Kennedy because I have notes on that one. Oh, you can't print it. Let me see if I can print it. What date was it found? I'll pull it up. Do you have a pen to it? I do have a pen. Maybe it's in the where I didn't see it there. This computer it recognizes that printing, but it's not printing. So you can communicate with Gina, have her put in August 10th, 2016, have her go there on Odyssey under the case number, and you can either pick it up or have her bring it up.
Okay, I could probably bring it.
What?
Okay, I can bring it here. Let me see if I can print it.
And Mr. Robles, I presume you're ready?
Yes. So,
No, here you go.
Instead of waiting for it, Ms. Kennedy can wait. You can bring in the jury and then just deliver it to her once it's printed.
Absolutely.
What are we calling it now?
still Exhibit B5A.
B5A. Is that? Thank you, you may be seated. You're still under oath.
Yes, Your Honor.
5A is admitted. You may proceed.
Now, as you began to operate your video, it's fair to say that you recorded Mr. Boyd making a statement.
Yes, sir.
What did you hear Mr. Boyd say?
From my recollection, it was something along the lines of it would be legal for him to murder them, and talking to the officers that are to the south.
Now, when you heard Mr. Boyd said it would be legal for him to murder the officers on the arrest team, what concerns did that raise in your mind?
Well, I have a subject who's armed with knives and making statements of killing officers right in front of me, so it concerned me.
You would agree with me that you watched Mr. Boyd pick up his belongings, correct?
Yes, sir.
What did that tell you about whether Mr. Boyd was surrendering?
It didn't give me any indication that he was surrendering. He hadn't relinquished his knives.
Why is it important, in order for a person to surrender, for that person to surrender their weapons?
Well, for officer safety and for their safety, we want to take the weapons out of the equation altogether. They can lay those down and comply there, then we can take all the time in the world to talk and come to another resolution and work out how we're going to take that person into custody. With the weapons in the mix, that's the greatest concern right there. You can't talk around the weapons.
Looking at the frame that's in front of you, can you identify the location where Detective Sandy was standing?
It's on the other side of this officer, back over here.
So you've drawn a green arrow in identifying the location where Detective Sandy was located, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And what did you see Detective Sandy do? Shortly after this particular frame of the video.
Well, at this point, I don't know that this is Officer Sandy.
Okay.
I know that there is another officer up here, and at this particular time, this officer begins to deploy a noise flash diversionary device.
Now, you say you didn't know it was Detective Sandy, correct?
Yes, sir.
Why didn't you know who it was?
Well, I had not heard, I've read through all the CADs, and the thing is that when those CADs and that information is on the computer, those are like snippets in time as far as the running history. There's no guarantee that that person is still standing in the same spot they were when they said the transmission that they said at that certain time. Pieces move and these situations are fluid. So I had no indication that there was another, that it was exactly Detective Sandy in that position. I knew there was an officer there, I just didn't know it was Detective Sandy.
Now, you had mentioned you saw this particular officer take some sort of action. What was that?
He deployed a noise flash diversionary device.
If you could clear the screen.
Try it again. Okay.
What is it that you see the person you identified doing?
Right here, you can see the arm back, and he's about ready to deploy the noise flash diversionary device. It's about ready to throw it.
What is that object that's depicted in frame 32?
This is the noise flash diversionary device being deployed.
How did you know it was a noise flash diversionary device?
Training and experience that I know that the detectives, knowing that this officer closest to me is a rope detective who I later gather that is Acting Sergeant Ingram. They also have noise flash diversionary devices. And like I said, with my training experience, if we're throwing something, 99.9% of the time, it's going to be a noise flash diversionary device.
Now, you had great experience with this particular device, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, what did you expect would be the effect on Mr. Boyd from the noise flash diversionary device?
Like most situations that I've dealt with as far as having a noise flash diversionary device thrown, it to overwhelm Mr. Boyd's senses and for him to drop down, basically be scared of it, and drop down and immediately want to surrender.
Now, at this particular time, what statement, if any, did you make as this event unfolded?
I believe I said do it.
Why did you say do it?
At the time, it's kind of like when you see something occurring, a car pulling out out of a driveway, and you go to talk and say, "Hey, don't back out, I'm coming." Like you're talking to it, and they can't hear you, obviously. So I am just saying what I'm seeing, the noise flash diversionary device being thrown, and I say, "Do it." Like, here comes the noise flash diversionary device, and here comes the resolution. Hopefully, Mr. Boyd drops down, and we take him into custody.
Now, what did you see with regard to where the noise flash diversionary device ultimately ended up detonating?
I saw that it landed down at the feet of, or towards the feet of Mr. Boyd, and then rolled into like a little, behind a rock, a large piece of granite there at the bottom.
Using the marking ability of the screen, would you please identify where you saw the noise flash diversionary device ultimately come to rest?
Could you back it up a little bit, please? Thank you. Go ahead. Yeah, this area right here.
After having seen the noise flash diversionary device land in this bed of rocks, what concerns did you have about its effectiveness on Mr. Boyd?
I was concerned that it would actually, there's already a small concern because we're in an open air environment. The effects are more, or higher in an enclosed environment, because that pressure and the flash and everything that occurs with a noise flash diversionary device in a room seems more intense. When it's open like this, it has plenty of places for it to escape. So that being one. Two being that where it landed in front of a rock, so the effects normally that would be felt directing towards the person you're deploying the noise flash diversionary device at is being blocked by it, is being shielded by that rock. I'm sorry.
Now, what is it that's shown on frame 61?
This is the bright flash that the noise flash diversionary device deployed.
And what sound did you hear from the noise flash diversionary device?
A loud bang.
And what is that plume that we see?
So with most noise flash diversionary devices, there's a small amount of smoke that will come from the flash powder that's in them. It's just part of the device itself. But this is a mixture of it landing in the sand itself and kicking up that sand with the pressure that is coming out from the noise flash diversionary device. So it's this plume of sand and smoke combination coming up from the detonation.
Now, based on your observations of Mr. Boyd, what effect, if any, did the noise flash diversionary device have on him?
None.
And how do you know that?
Because it didn't elicit the response that I'm trained to see, not to mention any type of flinching or shuddering from the impact of that noise flash diversionary device being deployed.
What, in your experience, have you seen people who have been affected by a flash noise diversionary device do?
Well, the ones that are like deployed right at the feet of people that I've seen or that I've deployed myself, there's the immediate jump of just being startled instantaneously. And some will freeze in place and just be so terrified, and then others will immediately just fall to the floor and immediately dart their hands and arms out and submit. None of that occurred he just, Mr. Boyd just stood there and took the effects and continued looking towards the officers.
Now, what did you know about the canine officer who was there? Or I should say, who was the canine officer who was there as part of the arresting?
That was Officer Weimerskirch.
And how did you know it was Officer Weimerskirch as opposed to any other canine officer with the Albuquerque Police Department canine unit?
Well, Officer Weimerskirch had already been discussing and coordinating with Sergeant Fox from when I was down at the base of the hill and from when I first arrived. So his constant talking told me that he was somehow involved with the arrest team. And then he has a very distinct voice on the radio, so it's pretty prominent to know that it was him, that he was the one that was dealing with, or was the one talking with Sergeant Fox from the arrest team. So I ascertained that that was him.
And how closely have you worked as a SWAT team officer with the canine unit?
We are, they constantly train with us. We're in the same tactical section. We do SWAT activations together. They deploy when we deploy with the SWAT activations. They're a constant tool that is with us, and we work closely together.
How often have you seen a police service dog sent to apprehend or bite a suspect?
Hundreds of times.
And how effective is a police service dog's bite in causing a suspect to surrender or to be taken into custody?
It's very effective. That is always the one less lethal tool that, in my training experience, has always worked. I mean, it is constant. I know that if the dog goes, and this is just in my training experience from what I've seen, in the interactions that I've had with the police service dogs, whenever they're sent and we actually apprehend a suspect with that dog bite holds and we get our subject.
Now, what did you see Officer Weimerskirch do with his police service dog?
Well, at this point, I don't see Officer Weimerskirch doing anything yet. I'm focusing on Mr. Boyd and this, the effects and the plume from the noise flash diversionary device.
When do you realize that Officer Weimerskirch has sent or deployed his police service dog?
At this point, right after this noise flash diversionary device goes, as you can see from the angle here, I'm a little bit back from the arrest team, a few steps back, and I'm lower than them. So you can see this large outcropping of rocks. This is what I ascertain is the only cover that I have potentially in the area. So I'm looking at that while I'm also looking at Mr. Boyd, and know that I'm going to move up and be online right here with these officers. It's a common tactic for law enforcement for all officers to kind of come online, being shoulder to shoulder, as it were, so that you have all potential threats in front of you, and you can have a lateral field of view with the other officers, so that we're not stepping in front of each other, and we have intersecting fields of our less lethal tools and our lethal tools.
So what are you doing as depicted in this video?
Well, like I said, I'm moving up and coming up online, and this is the first time when I see the police service dog here come into my right peripheral field of view. Again, my main concern, being a cover officer, is focusing on Mr. Boyd.
Now, what was your responsibilities as a cover officer?
I am there to provide security and containment for the arrest team that is there, and especially for the officers that are in charge of deploying the less lethal tools.
How did you determine that it was your role to serve as a cover officer?
That was directed to me by Sergeant Fox as I deployed, but in any activation, that is the initial role you will take on until you get to that location and find out, hey, we need a guy on a beanbag shotgun, or I need you to be hands-free. So then you relinquish that role and go to do that task. Initially, you show up and you are lethal cover because there is potential that the other jobs have been filled already.
Now, what did you know about the deployment of the taser shotgun at about this time?
At this time, I could only, like I said, I'm focusing on Mr. Boyd. I now have the police service dog moving in, and I have the sound. Like I told you, I have the noise canceling muffs on my equipment, so I have the radio traffic in my ear, but I'm hearing the deployment of the two taser shotgun rounds now become deployed while I'm focusing on these two things.
When you say you hear the sound, what exactly do you mean?
It's hard to describe it. It makes with the taser shotgun rounds and with beanbag rounds, you get like a clapping of hands, like a loud thwap, for lack of a better term, and you hear those, and then the racking of the shotgun forearm, which is telling you the weapon is in motion. So obviously one was deployed, and now another one is being cycled into the weapon system or the apparatus, being the less lethal tool. So that's what I hear, the two thwaps, if you will, coming out of the taser shotgun.
Now, would you please explain why you weren't able to see the taser shotgun being deployed?
At this point, like I said, I am a cover officer, and my main focus is looking here and trying to see what Mr. Boyd is doing with his hands through that plume of smoke.
Now, at about this point, what command do you give Mr. Boyd?
Tell him to get down on the ground.
Why do you give Mr. Boyd the command to get on the ground?
Well, like most times when we deploy a noise flash diversionary device, sometimes people, because of their being startled, don't know what it is you want them to do. So we yell out the commands of what we want you to do. Get on the ground. That's a pretty basic and very common one to figure out. Get on the ground. So I'm not telling you anything specific. I'm just saying get on the ground. Because if they get on the ground, they are now at a position of disadvantage and less of a threat to me or any other officer. I can see them move more, and it's going to take more of them moving for them to actually attack someone. So if they're down on the ground, then I know, okay, we have a little bit more time.
For the record, we're at 125 as far as frames.
I apologize. I'll continue to refer to frames. So at about this point, at frame 125, you made the statement, get on the ground, correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, why didn't you use another phrase like, put your knives down, or anything like that?
Well, at this point, I had not seen Mr. Boyd draw any knives, so I was going back to my training, and if I don't have anything that I'm really focused on as far as a tool or a weapon of sorts, I'm just going to go with the blanket statement of get on the ground or something along those lines, so that way they know what I'm talking about.
With this one command to get on the ground, what was Mr. Boyd's response?
He did not get on the ground. I believe he just threw down his bags and stayed oriented on the officers that are over here to the right.
When did you begin to realize the movement of the arrest team?
Well, right here, now that I'm really focusing on Mr. Boyd, now out of my peripheral, I see movement. This is kind of a long explanation here. This device, my magnifier, kicks over to the right of my rifle. So as I'm looking over my sights, I'm looking over here towards Mr. Boyd over my weapon system, and I have to focus in between here, the space that's in between my sight here and this magnifier. There's a gap. So that's where I'm looking over my weapon system here and looking through here at the same time, trying to divert my attention and use my peripheral to see Officer Weimer-Skirch here start moving up.
Approximately how close to Mr. Boyd had Officer Weimer-Skirch moved before you were able to see him? And if I need to move this up, please let me know.
Before I was able to see him?
Yes.
Well, right now at this point, I can barely see something like probably about his head over the top of my magnifier.
Now, again, would you please explain why the camera shows something different that you could see, given the relationship of where the camera is and where your head actually is?
Well, the camera is off to the right of me on my head and up or at a 20-degree up from my actual line of sight. It's not in line with my eye. It's off to the right and up So it's looking on the outside of my whole weapon system and everything, kind of like off of the right shoulder type deal, not directly in line straight with my line of sight in my helmet, if you will.
So it's fair to say that what the video shows is not what you could actually see?
Yes, sir.
And it's fair to say that what you were able to see was basically what's in between your sighting system, the aim point, and your magnifier.
Yes.
Now, would you please explain how you're holding the weapon?
Well, right now I'm at this is, again, the angle of the camera doesn't do justice because I'm at a low ready that's designated by Mr. Boyd. So a low ready is my muzzle, from my angle, from my view, is below Mr. Boyd here. It's actually oriented down here. And I'm looking over my sights here. But it appears elevated because they are higher than me. Mr. Boyd's position is higher than me, so my low ready is going to be more elevated this way. Again, with the officers who are now off to my right, they are also elevated. So I am in an upward angle, if you will.
Now, as Officer Weimerskirch moves forward and we reach this particular point, what concerns do you have about Officer Weimerskirch closing distance on Mr. Boyd?
At this point, this is where I can actually start to pick up Officer Weimerskirch through this gap that I was talking about right here in my peripheral. And the reason I say it's only through my peripheral because right now I have the police service dog who is attempting to apprehend the suspect, Mr. Boyd. And Mr. Boyd's hands are now down around his waist.
From what you could see, how effective was the police service dog in controlling Mr. Boyd?
In all my time of dealing with the police service dog, this was the first time I had seen the dog come up for the bite and completely release, like completely come off and not go on the bite.
Again, Counsel, I'm just going to ask that you reference the frames of the records.
Okay. So this would be this would be frame 163?
Yes, sir.
And that's the frame in which you see the police service dog attempting to bite Mr. Boyd, but failing to do so.
Yes, sir.
Now, you have a light on your weapon, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Would you please describe that light?
So this is a weapon-mounted light made by Surefire. I have it mounted here on the 12 o'clock position of my rifle. And it's just because even during the daytime, there's the potential that you're going to move from a light outside well-lit area and move into a darker area. So it's always good to have a lighting source so that you can further identify who you're dealing with and identify where the potential threat is at on that person. Sorry, let me get rid of that.
Now, why did you activate your light?
Well, the camera, this being a high-def camera doesn't actually show the real level of lighting that was out there. It was much darker than this. This is actually a lot brighter. But because Mr. Boyd is now reaching down towards his waist area and pockets, I'm engaging my light system so that now I can actually see a lot better where his hands are going and what he's doing with that.
And that's at frame 164 where the light is off, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then we have frame 166. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
Please explain, why this light helped you see Mr. Boyd and what that light says about how dark it actually was on that night.
Well, you can clearly see that the light is casting here off of the top of my rifle barrel. And then in the previous frame, Mr. Boyd's sweatshirt appeared a very dark gray, and now it's a well-lit white, fair gray color.
So let me move back from frame 166. Is that what you're referring to, the change in lighting from frame 164 to frame 165 and 166?
Yes, sir.
Now, what does that say about the lighting, the availability of light on that night at that time?
Well, if this was actually brighter, outside, the light that I'm initiating on the top of my rifle would have washed out completely. You wouldn't have been able to see it and show up on Mr. Boyd. The fact that it is lighting him up that pronounced tells you how dark it actually was and getting there.
Now, at about frame 171, what statement or order did you give to Mr. Boyd?
I told him to get down on the ground again. I
Why
believe
did
get
you-
down on the ground now.
Why did you tell Mr. Boyd to get on the ground now?
I'm just reaffirming the commands the entire time. I'm telling him I want him to get on the ground.
Now, how well are you able to see Officer Weimerskirch as we move from, frames 166, and here we'll end up stopping at 190?
I can see him very well through, like I said, through this opening in between my sighting systems, and have that lateral movement that's now from this camera angle. It looks like it's moving alongside my right side, but from my perception, my view, it looks like it's moving lateral to me. So as I'm looking this way, it looks like it's moving from right to left into my field of view, like the officers are coming online in front of me, like they're going to be walking right in front of me type.
Now, approximately how far away are you from Mr. Boyd as this is taking place?
About 25 feet.
Now, given the fact that you were there, what is your estimate about the distance at which Officer Weimerskirch was at this point, frame 190?
At this point, I'm sorry, from the frame itself?
Yes, approximately how far away was Officer Weimerskirch at frame 190?
From here, I would say he's at least 7 to 8 feet, it appears to me.
Now, what did you perceive Mr. Boyd to be doing at about frame 212?
Well, right here, Mr. Boyd's hands are going back towards his waistband. And again, now I'm extremely focused, and this appears to me that this distance from, this distance from right here to right here is, to me, my perception is he's right on top of him.
When you say he is right on top of him, what are you referring to, who are you referring to, and what does that mean?
I'm referring to Mr. Boyd being right on top of Officer Weimerskirch. My perception is that he is within an arm's reach from the time this is unfolding.
Now, you say it's your perception. What is it about this camera that doesn't provide or that doesn't exactly explain what it is you could actually see with your own eyes?
Well, like I said, it's off to the right, and it's two-dimensional as opposed to three-dimensional when I'm looking at it and I'm looking straight on. The rapidly evolving nature of this whole situation, Mr. Boyd and Officer Weimerskirch, like I said, appeared like right in front of each other, standing right in front of each other. I can't explain it better than that.
Mr. Rolo's what frame?
That's frame 220. What could you see in Officer Weimerskirch's hands?
In the frame, sir? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Well, he doesn't have a weapon system. He has his leash, I believe.
How common is it for a canine officer not to be armed with a weapon when working with their police service dog?
It's very common. If he's deploying his dog, he's not going to have his weapon system in his hand.
Now, what concerns did you have for Officer Weimerskirch's safety, and as you described it, because Mr. Boyd was right on top of him?
Well, when Officer Weimerskirch was moving up, it caused me great concern because of if a canine handler is moving up for whatever reason, usually he has his lethal cover or a lethal cover right with him, or usually going ahead of him, for protection. Like, he'll dictate that, hey, go ahead, and I'm gonna come up behind you, kind of thing. And the fact that I saw Officer Weimerskirch first startled me, and I was very concerned because now he's in extreme close proximity to Mr. Boyd.
Now, I had talked to you with regard to frame 220 and what happened subsequent, and that is, what was Mr. Boyd doing with his hands?
Right here, he's reaching into his pockets and retrieving his knives.
Now, that's frame 239, correct?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
And you began to draw. Would you please indicate where Mr. Boyd's hands were located with the arrows?
Right here and right there. Both hands are reaching into the pockets.
Based on your training and experience, why did you conclude that Mr. Boyd was reaching for his knives by reaching for his pockets?
Because the information that I had gathered from the CAD system and on the way there was that he had placed the knives in his front pockets, and he left them open in his front pockets. So when he was reaching into his front pockets, that's where I believe the knives to be.
Let me back up to approximately frame 231. What orders did you give Mr. Boyd at this point?
I believe I gave him further commands to get on the ground.
How many times did you tell Mr. Boyd at approximately frame 231 to get on the ground?
I'm sorry, how many times in general, like
No,
overall?
how many times at that particular point?
I believe twice at that particular point.
How many total commands did you give to Mr. Boyd?
4.
And all 4 commands were to get on the ground.
Yes, sir.
What was Mr. Boyd's reaction or response to your commands to get on the ground?
To not get on the ground and then to retrieve his knives.
Now, at about frame 265, what do you see Mr. Boyd doing?
He has now pulled his knives out from his pockets here and is bringing them out to his sides.
Now, what did you see the police service dog do as Mr. Boyd's knives were being drawn?
At this point, I'm not looking at the police service dog. I'm looking at Mr. Boyd now because once he reached into his pockets and retrieved his knives, I am really focusing on his hands. This is the first time I've actually seen Mr. Boyd pull his knives. So I'm focusing on those hands and looking for the knives and how they're being held.
Now, would you please explain
Sorry.
how the rifle would prevent you from seeing the police service dog?
Well, at this point, I'm now transitioning from looking over the top of the weapon system, now that Mr. Boyd has retrieved his knives. And this whole apparatus here is directly in front of me, underneath me, if you will. So the dog is in line with the bottom of that. So I can't see details of the canine itself. Its movement is occurring, but I can't see it because my barrel is in the way.
Now, you've heard testimony in this case, and you've seen the video where Mr. Boyd takes a step. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, did you see Mr. Boyd take a step?
I was not focused on Mr. Boyd's legs at that time.
Well, why is that?
Because I was intently focused on the knives he was holding in his hands.
Why did you choose not to focus on Mr. Boyd's legs and instead focus on his upper body?
Well, at this point, like I said, there's 5, 6, 7 different things occurring at this exact moment. And I see these officers here coming in close proximity, and I am really paying attention to what Mr. Boyd is doing with the knives that he has just drawn and the proximity between Mr. Boyd and those officers.
Please explain why you believe Officer Wyman-Scourge created a danger for himself.
Well, the opportunity was created for Mr. Boyd to actually deliver deadly force with the edge weapons that he had by closing that distance.
By having Mr. Boyd draw his knives, what did that tell you about his intent?
That he had intent. I mean, him making the action of not following my commands and getting down on the ground, and instead retrieving his knives, that told me he had intent to follow through with his commands, or that he was saying, I'm sorry.
When you saw Mr. Boyd holding his knives as he is in frame 290, what did you think Mr. Boyd was going to do next?
Well, like I said, from my perception and having to take in the movement that's occurring from these officers here and then Mr. Boyd's position, in my perception, it looked like he was going to come straight down on the officers in a stabbing motion, because the way he pulled the weapon systems out, or excuse me, the knives out from his pockets and then took that aggressive fighting stance. I'm sorry, my picture erased. The motion that he was in at that point, it appeared that he was going to come down and strike those officers.
Now, in what mode is your weapon kept? Safe, is that right?
I'm sorry, sir?
Now, is your weapon in safe, correct?
Yes, it's always unsafe.
And can you please explain why your finger, your trigger finger, index finger, is along the side of your weapon?
That comes with years of training with this weapon system. You always, it's one of the general firearm safety rules, you always keep your finger straight and off the trigger until your sights are on target. So my finger always rests, whether it's a pistol, a shotgun, any weapon system, your finger is straight along the side until you make the decision to fire, and then you move your finger from there to the trigger.
On frame 290, would you please draw an outline around your, or along your finger, or around your finger, so that everyone knows what we're referring to?
Okay. This is my finger stretched out straight.
Now,
along the frame.
why is it your finger black in color?
I'm wearing gloves.
Now, what do you see your finger beginning to do going from frame 287 to 293?
Well, you can see my finger right around in this area here starts to bend, and my finger starts moving into the trigger guard and onto the trigger.
What does your finger movement say about your decision to use your weapon?
It was at that point that I decided to use deadly force.
When you say at that point, what was Mr. Boyd doing at the moment you decided to use deadly force?
Well, from my perception, he had demonstrated the intent, the means, and now the opportunity is available for him. I perceived him to be an immediate deadly threat.
So how was Mr. Boyd holding his weapons, turning your attention to frame 292?
His weapons are outstretched and out to his sides, and he's standing in this aggressive, I say an aggressive fighting stance.
Now, would you please describe what your finger does from frame 295 to 306?
Well, you can see it right here. It's stretched out straight. And then go ahead and, can you move it, sir? And as it moves, you can see it start to curl in and move into my trigger guard and onto my trigger.
Now, would you please explain the process by which you acquire your sights?
So the whole time the encounter was starting to occur and this movement was unfolding from both sides, I was looking over, like I said, the top of my rifle. As soon as Mr. Boyd had reached into his pockets and retrieved his knives, and I made that determination that I was going to use deadly force, I then transitioned from looking at Mr. Boyd, clear and seeing his person, to focusing on the red dot that's in the center of my sight here. So I'm transitioning my focus from Mr. Boyd to my sighting system and looking through my sighting system. And then at that point, I'm now performing all the fundamentals of marksmanship, excuse me. I'm pulling my head down onto my rifle stock, making sure I have good cheek contact. I'm pulling the weapon system into my shoulder, making sure I'm disengaging my safety on the weapon system at this time. With my front hand, I'm pulling the weapon system tight into my shoulder, and this is like a harmony, if you will, between me trying to force the harmony of the weapon system and the movement of my body, along with me lining up my eye through the sight on Mr. Boyd.
Now, is there a particular term in marksmanship that describes this process where you you bend the will of the weapon to do what it is you want it to do?
Well, this is weapons manipulation, but as far as sighting in and getting a sight, imposing your sight on the threat, is called sight picture, getting a sight picture.
Okay. Now, would you please explain what your sight picture would have been looking through your aiming system?
Yes, sir. So this is the, we've already talked about, I could talk about it again. The sighting system I have is an aim point, and it has basically a window that you can view straight through. There's the dot that sits in the middle of it. Inside of it, it doesn't project an actual dot onto the target. It's just the dot floating in that aperture, or excuse me, in that housing of the sight. Now, as you're looking through, you're putting that dot and focusing on that dot and putting it on the threat. So I would, looking through that window, I can see the torso of Mr. Boyd. And at that point, all I see is the torso, and I'm focusing on the dot, not on Mr. Boyd, because you impose the dot onto the threat that is there, and that threat, if you're doing a proper sight picture, should appear fuzzy and just have a silhouette there. You should just have a silhouette. So. Oh, it's back.
Now, you understand, having sat through this testimony, having been out there on that mountainside, that Detective Sandy fired 3 rounds.
Yes, sir.
What was your perception of Detective Sandy's actions as all of this was unfolding?
When this whole, the movement that was happening to my right was occurring, I did not know that it was Detective Sandy up here. Because Detective Sandy and Acting Sergeant Ingram are wearing along the same lines, jeans and the green vests, I had, keeping them in my peripheral, I had ascertained that I thought it was Sergeant Ingram that was standing up here with the canine handler. So to my knowledge, I had 2 less lethal officers standing up there, no lethal coverage in sight. So I thought I was the only lethal coverage at this point. So I had no idea that Detective Sandy was firing his weapon system.
Now, as the video unfolds, what do you see Mr. Boyd do? And we'll start with like frame 320, and we'll move through frame 346, 347. What do you see in the video happening with regards to Mr. Boyd?
In the video, you see Mr. Boyd changing his position.
From your vantage point, looking through your sights, what are you able to see?
Looking through my sights at this point, like I said, I had made the decision to use deadly force, and all I'm looking for at this point, knowing that I have officer wearing green over here, and Mr. Boyd was wearing a gray sweatshirt, I am imposing, like I said, my dot on that gray sweatshirt, and all I'm looking for is gray. So as I'm making that motion and transitioning from Mr. Boyd to my sight and doing that, I have these officers that I have seen start their movement. They have been moving from my right to left, like I told you before. And I'm making sure that I'm not going to shoot my other officers. So I'm looking through this little space right here, trying to keep the dot on Mr. Boyd, look through that empty space, make sure I'm not going to shoot my other officers, and then deploy my rounds. So at this point, I was,
And then we're referring to frame 348?
yes, sir, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, go ahead. You were saying?
No, I was just going to say, it's at this point that my attention had to be diverted quickly to these officers right here that are in close proximity, and then I come back and obtain what's called a flash sight picture and put my sight on the gray that I was looking for prior to that and deploy my rounds.
Now, what does frame 364 depict?
I believe that's my first shot. I'm sorry.
Now, what did you know about where your first shot hit at this time?
At this time, I did not know where it hit. I assumed I was aiming at the front of Mr. Boyd.
You understand today that you ended up shooting Mr. Boyd in the back, correct?
As it turns out, I did, yes, sir.
Would you please explain how it turned out that you shot Mr. Boyd in the back?
Well, like I just said, there's the 7 different things, the 10, I mean, I can come up with more than that of the stimulus that's in front of me that's happening, that all the things that I'm having to focus on and be cognizant of. So as I move from when I made the decision to fire to make sure that I was not going to injure my other officers and moved back, in that fraction of a second, Mr. Boyd had turned.
Now, what exactly are you able to see through your sighting system as the shot breaks?
At this point, like I said, it's a flashlight picture. So a flashlight picture is where acquisition of your red dot, imposing it on the target or the threat, and delivering the rounds all happen at the exact same time. So a flashlight picture means instantaneous, all of it happens now. So that's exactly what I did. I checked for them, my other officers, and then did a flashlight picture and deployed my rounds.
Now, you've heard testimony in this case about how a sighting system such as an aim point should be used, correct?
Yes, sir.
You've heard testimony about how the manufacturer intends for you to keep your eyes, both eyes open with the use of the aim point.
Yes, sir.
How do you keep your eyes when you use an aim point sight?
Well, after years and years of deploying with these sighting systems, and then also being trained as a sniper observer, I can't shoot with both eyes open like that. I have to squint one eye just because of the constant training of using magnified optics. It's just a natural habit for me to squint one eye to get better focus out of my dominant eye, my shooting eye. So I don't shoot that way. I shoot with one eye squint and the other eye completely open. Not to mention we don't have monocular vision where one eye can focus on one thing and the other eye can focus on something else. They both focus at the same time. So.
Now, you fired 3 rounds, correct?
Yes, sir.
Why did you fire 3 rounds at Mr. Boyd?
They were 3 rounds, rapid succession. That's a standard defensive response, being on the SWAT team.
Your Honor, if you'd switch it to the prosecution table, appreciate it.
I'd like to present to you State's Exhibit 1, which is the Albuquerque Police Department use of force policy. And specifically, I'd like to focus on Section 2-52-2H, and that is the immediate threat section of the use of force SOP. When you made your decision to use deadly force against Mr. Boyd, what role did this particular SOP play in your assessment of the level of threat which Mr. Boyd posed to Officer Weimerskirch?
This actually gives by very definition the immediate threat that I felt Mr. Boyd posed to the canine handler.
Now, what about the fact that you were not able to see Mr. Boyd take a step? What does this SOP tell you about that factor and how it plays into determining immediacy?
It doesn't play a factor.
Will you please explain why?
Well, it's the opportunity to not go through the intent and means at this point, but the opportunity. The opportunity is the ability for the subject to deliver the deadly force with the edged weapon or the weapon on the officer. So the opportunity is the distance. That distance being closed, whether it be from the suspect or from the officer, the factor is the distance. If they were further away, it wouldn't occur. But since they are not further away, they are closer together, the opportunity is there.
Now, according to this use of force policy, an immediate threat may currently exist or may happen in moments with or without warning, correct?
Correct.
Would you please explain why Mr. Boyd's attack does not need to be in motion for there to be an immediate threat?
I'm going to object to the leading me to that question, Your Honor.
Please explain why Mr. Boyd's attack does not need to be in motion to meet the definition of immediate threat under the SOP.
Some objection, Your Honor.
Why was Mr. Boyd's threat an immediate one, even though he wasn't moving?
Because he had all the characteristics right here of an immediate threat. He had the intent. He stated his intent that he was wanting to kill officers and gave pre-assault indicators by reaching towards his waistband. The means is he had the weapon systems. He had his knives, and he pulled them out, showing his intent and demonstrating his intent. And then the opportunity, like I said, him pulling out his knives when he was given commands to get down on the ground, and then the closing distance of the canine handler, that distance now closed, the opportunity is available. So he met all three of the indicators for immediate threat.
And please explain why you decided to fire 3 rounds at Mr. Boyd.
Because he posed an immediate deadly threat to Officer Weimerskirch.
May I take a moment to confer, Your Honor? What communication, if any, did you have with Detective Sandy during this encounter that was recorded on your helmet camera?
I had no contact with Detective Sandy.
During this entire incident, before shots were fired, what communication, if any, did you have with Detective Sandy?
None.
Now, we went through your video frame by frame. What is it about going through your video frame by frame that doesn't accurately represent what it is you perceive on that day?
Well, it going frame by frame, we're able to pick apart and look at each one of these things in slow motion and see every little detail. All of the things that occurred that day happened in the blink of an eye, at the speed of life.
Those are my questions, Your Honor. Pass the witness.
I don't have any questions, thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Mr. Perez.
Afternoon, ma'am.
First, I want to thank you for the good that you've done for both your country and the community.
Thank you.
And it is true that you did not plan or create the failed arrest attempt that happened in the foothills on March of 2014, did you, sir?
I had no dealings with the plan, no.
And I can't tell you how sorry I am that you are the one who was sent up into a mess that some other officer created.
Object to her testifying in the state.
You know from your military service the concept of duty, do you not?
Yes, ma'am.
My job as special prosecutor requires me as part of my duty to ask you some hard questions.
Relevance, Your Honor, and the attorney testifying now about what her duty is, that's not in his preview, Your Honor.
If you would just ask questions.
Sure, Your Honor. You understand I'm going to ask you some difficult questions about the shooting of James Boyd.
Same objection, Your Honor.
No allowed access now.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Yes, sir. You understand I'm going to ask you some hard questions about the shooting of James Boyd?
Yes, ma'am.
And are you ready for those this afternoon, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. You agree with me that police officers should not be above the law, is that right, sir?
I agree with that, yes, ma'am.
And they should be held accountable if they break the law.
Absolutely.
And if they are not held accountable, citizens will lose their trust in police officers, won't they?
Yes, ma'am, I agree with that.
And the same is true of veterans. Is that right, sir?
Objection, relevance.
Oh, I think they, yeah.
The same of veterans?
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
The fact that you've served this country does not give you a pass if you violate the law, does it, sir?
Absolutely not.
And as a police officer, if you stopped a veteran who was driving drunk, for example, you wouldn't let him go just because he was a veteran, would you, sir?
No, ma'am.
This shooting was not an accident, was it, Mr. Pettis?
No, it was not.
You made the intentional decision to shoot Mr. Boyd, didn't you?
Yes, ma'am.
And you knew that you were shooting him with a high-powered rifle?
I knew I was shooting with my rifle, yes, ma'am.
And you were shooting him with soft point .220 bullets?
Saw point 223, yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'm sorry, 223.
No, it's fine.
And those are special bullets that actually expand in the body, do they not, sir?
They can expand, yes.
And they are designed to inflict maximum damage to a human body, are they not?
I can't say that they're designed to inflict maximum damage. They're designed to not overpenetrate.
And to stay inside the body, is that right, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
And they are more likely to kill or cause great bodily harm than other types of bullets, are they not, sir?
I'm not an expert on that. I'm not sure that they could do more than another.
Okay. You aimed dead center, or what the police call center mass, at Mr. Boyd, is that right?
Yes, ma'am, I am Santa Mass.
Right at the middle of his body?
The middle of his torso, yes.
You put the red dot scope there and not on his arm or his leg, is that right, sir?
I put it center mass of what I had at the time.
And you knew that that shot would likely kill Mr. Boyd or cause great bodily harm to him. Did you not know that, sir?
I knew that it could cause great bodily harm. I can't say that I knew it was going to kill him.
Okay. And you did all of that with a man that you had encountered just for 3 minutes at the time that you shot him, is that right?
I'm not sure on the 3 minutes, but it was a short period of time, yes, ma'am.
Okay. You've had training in go signals and stop signals for when deadly force is authorized by APD, haven't you?
No, not in go signals.
Okay, I think you call them cues. Cues, you look for cues on whether it's appropriate to shoot or not shoot, is that right?
We look for behavioral cues, yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am, that is with the reactive control model that you were trained with, is that right, sir?
Yes, that is correct.
Your Honor, could you turn on the Elmo, please? And this is the reactive control model that we've been talking about, is that right,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Pettis? And this is this column on the right, the red column is the one that you've been trained in, is that right?
I've been trained in all of it, yes, ma'am.
Where it says armed assailant. And under this reactive control model, you are not allowed to shoot somebody just for making threats to you.
Just for making threats?
Yes, sir.
No, ma'am.
And you're not allowed to shoot somebody if they just have a weapon, particularly if it's a knife. Are you, sir?
I'm not understanding your question. Just because they're holding a knife?
Yes, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
And under the reactive control model, even if they are armed and threatening, the response is to show force. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And the line on the reactive control model is drawn right down the middle of this red column, is it not, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
And what it says in the reactive control model is that you can only use a deadly force and fire your weapon to stop an attack. Isn't that what it says, sir?
That is correct.
And again, up here at the top, it says there has to be an armed attack. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do.
And they also describe it as a deadly assault, do they not?
Yes, ma'am.
And there's an additional descriptor here. It says closes distance. Does it not, sir?
Yes, it does.
Under this model, you don't have the green light to shoot someone unless the person is engaged in an armed attack. Isn't that right, sir?
Correct. They have to be an armed attack.
And you know from your training that had Mr. Boyd, even at 7 feet distance from the officers, started to move towards the officers, the bullet from your gun would have traveled faster than he could have run. Is that right?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. Let me take it back to maybe on Friday where they were showing training videos. Do you remember that, sir?
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
And there was a training video with a guy with a knife and the officer with a gun. I think it was on the Tueler drill that your counsel showed.
Okay.
And there was one where the officer had his gun in his holster.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
And the person ran at him and he couldn't get his gun out, right? Do you remember that?
Yes.
Okay, and then there was another one right after that one that said if your gun is out, and the officer had their gun out at that point, and they moved the assailant just 10 feet away from that person, and in that demonstration they showed how with your gun out you could shoot somebody within 10 feet of you if they attacked you with a knife, get 2 shots off before they got to you. Do you recall that, sir?
I recall them actually having the gun out, and I do remember them deploying the rounds, yes.
Yes.
They shot the
So
assailant.
the bullet is faster than a person can run at you, is that right?
That's not a guarantee.
Yes, sir, if your gun is out and if you're ready to shoot, is that right?
Your reaction time is, there's several things that have to transpire as far as deploying your rounds and their movement.
Okay. Are you saying, sir, that from 10 feet away, had Mr. Boyd started to come at these officers, you couldn't have shot him before he got to the officers? Is that what you're saying?
He was closer than that.
Okay, and we'll get to that in a second, and what you said to the jury here today. And I want to talk about your statement. You in the police academy were trained in how to do an investigation of a crime, were you not?
Yes, ma'am.
When doing your own criminal investigation, you were trained to try to get statements from the suspect as soon as possible. Isn't that right?
Beyond scope.
I don't think so, Your Honor.
I'll concur the objection.
If you want to make arguments, you're going to have to approve.
Okay, Judge. Mr. Perez, Mr. Boyd was shot at 7:33 on March 16th, 2014,
I believe that's correct, yes, ma'am.
and you did not give a statement that evening, did you, sir?
No, ma'am, I didn't.
Instead, APD called a psychologist to help counsel you and Defendant Sandy at the scene that evening?
So actually, it's a cause for speculation.
I'll ask you to rephrase.
Was a psychologist called to the scene to help counsel you and Defendant Sandy?
I'm not sure if one was or not, ma'am.
Okay. Did you receive counseling that evening from a psychologist or a psychiatrist?
Not that I can recall.
Okay. A lawyer and a union representative was called for you that evening, sir?
I believe that's correct, yes.
And after processing, you were allowed to leave the area where the shooting took place, is that right?
That's correct.
And no one indicated to you that you and Mr. Sandy should not have any contact?
Yes, they told us we shouldn't have contact.
Okay. Did they tell you that you shouldn't talk to the other people who were out there at the scene?
Yes, ma'am.
And did they tell you you shouldn't review the video or any other evidence?
I had turned in my video.
Yes, sir. Did they tell you you shouldn't review the video or any other evidence?
No one said anything of that nature.
Okay. And you were not brought in for a statement until 2 full days later at 4 p.m. on March 18th, is that right?
I know it was 2 days later. I can't be sure of the actual time.
Okay. It wasn't at the police station where you gave your statement, but it was at the Family Advocacy Center, is that right?
That's correct.
And present at that statement was your attorney, Mr. Robles,
Yes, ma'am.
who at that time was also the attorney for Keith Sandy, is that right?
I believe he was, yes, ma'am.
And also present was one of the SWAT officers who'd been out at the scene at the same time you were, that SWAT officer, Anthony Sedler.
That's correct.
And the person doing the interview, Jeff Stone, was an APD officer that you knew and had worked with, is that right?
Yes, I had worked with him in the past.
Okay, and in fact, throughout the interview, he called you by your first name, Dom, did he not, sir?
I'd have to look back at the transcript. I'm sure he did.
Okay. During the 2 days between the shooting and the statement, did you discuss the shooting with any other officers at the scene?
No, I didn't.
Did you review the CAD or radio transmissions?
Not that I can recall, no, ma'am.
Did you review any other evidence?
No, ma'am, I didn't have access to any other evidence.
Did you go back and visit the scene, sir?
No, I did not.
Did you do any research online or elsewhere on how to deal with a police shooting investigation?
No, ma'am.
Did you look up what would be important legally to make sure that the shooting was justified?
No, ma'am.
And you had what most ordinary suspects do not. You had 2 days to calm down, get your thoughts together, and make sure you gave a statement that included everything that was important to your decision to shoot Mr. Boyd. Is that right, sir?
Object to the question is contrary to what was just discussed at the bench, Your Honor.
You had 2 days to calm down, get your thoughts together, and make sure you gave a statement that included everything that was important to your decision to shoot Mr. Boyd. Is that right, sir?
I had 2 days to get my thoughts together, yes, ma'am.
And you also had the counsel of a lawyer before you gave your statement. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
And Detective Stone conducted a friendly interview, did he not?
It didn't appear more friendly than normal.
He let you say whatever you wanted, did he not, sir?
He asked the questions and I answered them.
In fact, on page 2, he said, I'm going to just give you the floor, man, and let you run through everything that you did. Isn't that what he said, sir?
I believe he did, yes, ma'am.
And nowhere in that statement, which was about an hour and 15 minutes long, do you ever say that after pulling out his knives in response to the dog attack, that Mr. Boyd ever lunged towards the officers? You never indicated that that happened, did you, sir?
No, I never said he lunged.
You never said he came at the officers?
Not that I can recall, no, ma'am.
And you never said he even took a step towards the officers in all of that statement, did you, sir?
No, I didn't.
And you never saw him do any of those things?
On the day?
Yes, sir.
No, I didn't see him take a step.
And now from reviewing the videotape, you know that he was turning to his left before Defendant Sandy fired at him. Is that right, sir?
I'm not sure what you're asking. You're asking me in relation to what Defendant Sandy did?
After reviewing the video, you now know as you sit here that Mr. Boyd turned to his left before Defendant Sandy fired at him. Is that right?
I'm going to object. This isn't based on what happened out there. This is based on him reviewing the video and the video speaks for itself.
And you've admitted that he had his back to you when you fired.
That's correct, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and what you said at the time in your statement, that you decided to use deadly force because of a feeling that you had, is that right, sir?
I'd have to look at my statement.
What you said was, at page 53, counsel, at that instance, that's when I decided to follow through. It's line 13. At that instance, that's when I decided to follow through with deadly force because I felt that he was going to, I thought he was going to lunge forward and stab the canine handler or the officer that was directly next to him. Is that what you said in your statement, sir?
If that's what's in my statement, yes, ma'am.
And also on page 62, you repeated that. Line 16, counsel on page 62, I felt that he was going to lunge forward and stab those officers or potentially even kill those officers. Isn't that what you told Detective Stone, sir?
Yes, ma'am, I believe so.
You, without him taking a step or lunging or moving towards the officer, you anticipated that he might harm the officers, did you not, sir?
It's testimony on the part of the attorney that assumes facts that are not in evidence.
This cross-examination, Your Honor, I think that's a fair question.
Based on his testimony, though, it's a little bit different than the testimony side.
Okay. You anticipated that he might harm the officers, is that right?
I'm not understanding your question.
Yes, sir. You didn't see him take a step towards the officers.
I did not see a step, no, ma'am.
You didn't see an attack towards the officers where he moved towards them?
I saw an attack, I did not see him take a step.
Okay. You didn't see him lunge towards the officers?
No, I did not
You
see him
didn't see him
lunge.
close distance to the officers, did you, sir?
I didn't see him close distance, no, ma'am.
You shot because you felt he was going to lunge forward.
I shot because he had his knives out and he was in an aggressive stance and standing there in close proximity to the officers.
Yes, sir. What you told Detective Stone is that you shot because you felt he was going to lunge forward.
Yes, ma'am, I had the feeling he was going to lunge forward.
And now, from watching the video, you know that your feeling was wrong.
Your
Isn't
Honor,
that right, sir?
objection for him asking the question about now, based on watching the video speaks for itself.
Because that's a fair question.
Based on the question of what he watched in the video, you're allowed.
In fact, Mr. Boyd never closed distance on the police once he pulled his knives, did he, sir?
Having reviewed the video, I didn't, at the time it was occurring, I did not see that.
Okay.
In the video,
Okay, well, let me stop you there then, sir.
Yes,
'Cause
ma'am.
they won't let you talk about stuff on the video.
okay.
They closed distance on him, didn't they, sir?
Yes, Officer Wimskirch closed the distance, yes.
And Officer Sandy closed the distance on him, too.
Officer Sandy did walk behind the canine handler, yes.
And after he pulled out his knives in response to the dog coming up to him,
Objection to that, to assuming facts are not in evidence, it calls for speculation on the part of the attorney, because she's the one testifying.
okay, after he pulled the knives, he didn't pull his knives out until the dog ran up to him, isn't that right, sir? That's what happened. He put his hand out as the dog ran up to him, didn't he, sir?
I wasn't looking at his hand for touching the dog. I was looking at his hands going for his waistband.
Yes, sir. But when the dog first ran up to him, he didn't pull his knives out then. The dog went back and then came back again, and that's when he pulled out his knives. Is that right, sir?
I'd have to watch the video again, I
Okay.
believe, ma'am.
And as soon as he pulled out his knives at frame 310, or excuse me, at frame 295, he immediately dropped his arms to his side at frame 310, did he not, sir?
Video speaks for itself, Your Honor.
Walked him through it, Judge.
If he can recall, he can answer.
Sir, after he pulled out his knives, at frame 295, he immediately dropped his arms to his side at 310, did he not?
I can't recall that, I'd have to see it again.
And at one point, he said, "Don't make fun of people," didn't he, sir?
I didn't hear him say that, no ma'am.
Is that because you had these headphones on?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And then he turned to get on the ground, is that right, sir?
When is this occurring? I'm not sure when you're saying this.
Are you saying he never turned to get on the ground, sir?
I'm saying he was falling when after I deployed deadly force.
Sir, on states 48A, you see he turned to his left? Is that right, sir? That's from your video?
Yes, ma'am, he's turning there.
And at 48B, he's turning there too, sir, is he not?
Yes, ma'am.
And at 48C, he's still turning, isn't that right, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
And then at 48D, he's still turning?
Yes, ma'am.
And that's the one where you shoot him right there, 48D. And then at 48E, he's leaning forward, and at 48F, he goes onto the ground. Is that right, sir?
Is that, I can't see, is that 48F?
Yes, sir, and I'm sorry, it's got kind of a glare on it. That's 48F, sir, yes, sir. See him going to the ground there?
Yes, I see him falling there, yes.
You were not just given rules about go signals for shooting with the reactive control model, but you were also told when you should stop the use of force, were you not, sir, in your training?
Yes, ma'am.
And that is SOP, let me get the SOP. 252.3, this is State's Exhibit 1, Your Honor. F, and what you were trained is that once control of a combative subject is gained and there is no longer an objectively reasonable threat, strikes, blows, or other use of tools is considered excessive and will not be tolerated. Isn't that what the SOP says, sir?
That's what the SOP says, yes, ma'am.
Okay. After you shot him and he turned and lay down on the ground, he was no longer an imminent threat anymore. Was he, sir?
Objection to mischaracterization of the evidence laid down on the ground, Your Honor.
I'll ask you to read first.
Yes. After he was laying face down on the ground, he was not an imminent threat to anyone anymore. Was he, sir?
An immediate threat? No, ma'am.
Okay. Let's talk about surrendering, and one of the ways you know someone is no longer an imminent threat. One of the ways is if someone is actually obeying the commands of the officers. Is that right?
That's correct, yes, ma'am.
And the command you gave was to get on the ground, not to drop the knives.
That's correct, I told him to get on the ground.
All right. I want to talk about some of the things that you said in your statement, sir, because did you tell the jury today that you thought that Mr. Boyd was within arm's length of the officers? Is that what you said today?
I believe I told him that, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Close proximity, yes.
Even though you had 2 days to think about that, at no time at any point in this statement did you ever say that these officers were at arm's length, did you, sir?
In my statement?
Yes, sir.
I'd have to review my statement.
Okay, can you find and highlight for me any place in your statement, sir, where you used the word arm's length from those officers?
I will look through it.
Okay.
No, I don't believe I said it, ma'am.
Okay. In fact, you know from your training what is necessary for you to say to make a shooting justifiable, don't you, sir?
Objection, argumentative, Your Honor.
It's not argumentative, Judge. You know that the closer an officer is to a suspect, the more likely it is for the shooting to be justified.
Argumentative.
It's not argumentative.
I'm sorry, can you repeat?
Yes, sir. You understand that the closer a suspect is to an officer, the more likely it is, the easier it is for you to claim that the officer was in danger.
Depending on the threat, the closer the distance, the higher the threat, yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. And so today you said you thought that they were at arm's length, but in your statement, sir, at page 51, when you were asked by Detective Stone, page 51, counsel, line 16. When the arrest team was moving towards the suspect after everything was deployed, approximately how close did it get to him? And just an estimate. Your estimate at that time, sir, my estimate would be within 7 feet. Isn't that what you said in your statement, sir?
I believe it is.
Okay. And you actually never went back and measured the distance between the canine officers and Officer Sandy and Mr. Boyd, did you, sir?
No, I didn't go measure, no.
Okay. And you wouldn't dispute the actual measurements of those who went out and measured the distance, would you, sir?
Your people might be, I'm not understanding.
Somebody who actually went and measured, you wouldn't challenge their measurement of that distance.
Vague, form of the question.
You have also had training on the elements for defense of others and justifiable homicide by a police officer. Is that right, sir?
As far as curriculum,
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure.
Isn't that something that they went over when they showed your curriculum with your training officers? About
Did you
what
say
was
justifiable
homicide
elements?
by a police officer? Yes, sir.
I believe so, yes, ma'am.
All right. And in your statement, you repeated certain statements, and you've done that today. You've talked about an arrest team. Is that right, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
You understand that one of the elements under which an officer may have justifiable homicide is if they are arresting someone and the person is resisting arrest. Don't you understand that, Mr. Perez?
Can you repeat that question one more time? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. One of the few ways an officer can have a justifiable homicide is if they are arresting someone and the person is resisting arrest. That's one of the elements for justifiable homicide. Is that right?
If they're resisting arrest and pose an immediate threat, then they can deliver deadly force,
Okay.
yes.
And Mr. Boyd was never told he was under arrest, was he, sir?
Not from the time I was there.
Right, sir. You never told him he was under arrest?
No, ma'am, I didn't tell them that.
Objection, relevance.
While you were there, while you were there, Defendant Sandy never told him he was under arrest?
While I was there, no, ma'am, I didn't hear anyone.
And Rick Ingram never told him he was under arrest while you were there?
Not that I heard, no, ma'am.
And Officer Weimerskirch never told him he was under arrest?
Not that I could hear, no, ma'am.
Okay. In fact, he was told just the opposite, that he could pick up his bags, come down safely, and they would not hurt him. Isn't that correct, sir?
Objection calls for speculation.
Okay. Were you aware from the radio transmissions that they told him just the opposite, that he could pick up his bags, come down safely, and they would not hurt him?
From the radio transmissions, no, ma'am.
A person can't be resisting arrest unless they're told they're under arrest. Isn't that right, sir?
Objection calls for legal conclusion.
Oh, it doesn't, Judge. It's from his training.
Based on training, he can answer the question.
One more time, ma'am, I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. A person can't be resisting arrest unless they're told they're under arrest. Can they, sir?
Well, if they're being placed under arrest, then that would, if they're resisting then yes, they'd be resisting arrest.
If they know they're being placed under arrest?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Have you ever thought about this from Mr. Boyd's perspective?
Objection, relevance.
You've heard testimony about a reactionary gap for shooting, haven't you, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
There is a reactionary gap when you ask a person to do something too, is there not?
There's natural reaction time for everything.
Yes, sir. And particularly after you've thrown a flashbang at someone, there may be a larger reactionary time for them to figure out what's going on, right, sir?
There's potential for a reaction time, yes, to that.
Okay? And when they've been hit with a taser shotgun, that might distract them from being able to focus on what you're saying, like get on the ground.
It may give some distraction, yes, ma'am.
And if a dog is running up to them while you're yelling at them to get on the ground, that may also, again, affect their reactionary time because they're dealing with something running towards them. Is that right, sir?
It could divert their attention, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And how many seconds do you think Mr. Boyd should have been given to figure out that he was under arrest and to react by getting on the ground, sir?
Well, you have uniformed officers that are moving towards you and deploying all these tools. That is an arrest procedure. So I would expect him to follow the commands that we are giving him.
Okay, and
Right
so
now.
the first time that Mr. Boyd should have known he was under arrest is when you said for the first time for him to get on the ground?
During my interaction, I mean, he should have known he was under arrest with the contact from previous officers throughout the day.
Oh, yes, sir. Even though none of them ever, well, you don't know if any of them ever told him he was under arrest, did you, sir?
No, I don't know that, no, ma'am.
And in fact, you don't know if all of them kept saying to him, you're not under arrest, you can come down and be safe, right, sir?
No, I can't.
Okay, so let's talk about when you were there.
Yes, ma'am.
From the time that you first said, get on the ground, after you first said get on the ground, the dog ran up to him, is that right?
After I first said get on the ground, that was right after the noise flash diversionary device was thrown.
Yes, sir. And then after, between that time and the time that you next said it, the dog had run up to him, is that right, sir?
The dog was starting to run up, yes, ma'am.
Okay. And the time period between the time that Mr. Boyd heard that and then finally said, don't make fun of people, and turned to his left to get on the ground, do you know how many seconds that was, sir?
Yeah, objection assumes facts not in evidence, and this officer's testified he hasn't even heard something like that.
Let me just take out the don't make fun of people. From the time that you all, after the dog approached, said get on the ground, and the time he turned to his left to get on the ground, do you know how many seconds that was, sir?
Your Honor, again, assumes facts not in evidence, turns to his left to get on the ground, there's no evidence that he turned his left to get on the ground.
From the time that you, after the dog came up and he turned to his left here, 48A to get on the ground, do you know how many seconds that was, sir?
No, ma'am.
And you recognize that you could not have shot him in the back unless he turned with his back to you, is that right, sir?
That's correct.
Let's talk about what you could see. I think you've talked about you were looking over your weapon here and through this little crack at Mr. Boyd, is that right?
No, I was looking over my weapon system at Mr. Boyd and through here at the officers over here.
Yes, sir. And through the red dot scope, you could see Mr. Boyd's gray sweatshirt,
Yes, ma'am.
and you aimed at center mass,
Yes, ma'am.
and you turned your light on so that you could see him better.
That's correct.
And you're aware, sir, that on the front of Mr. Boyd's sweatshirt, he had letters that said GAP. Is that right, sir?
approach?
Sure.
Can we object to this, or kind of
Well, you have a long redirect, Mr. Robles, if I go for another 15. I probably have 15, 20, 30 more minutes, Judge, yeah. We
Rather
probably
than
should,
rush everyone or
okay.
fatigue everyone, let's take a recess now. Thank you. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen. And just a standard reminder is that you're not to discuss the case with any other jurors or with any other person. Don't allow anyone